Most men believe attraction fades with age. So they panic. They chase youth desperately. Dress like younger men. Speak louder. Try harder. Hide every sign that time has touched them. And in doing so, they destroy the one thing mature women find deeply irresistible in older men: presence. The Stoics understood something modern culture forgot long ago. A man does not become attractive through desperation to appear younger. He becomes attractive through discipline, self-respect, and quiet mastery over himself. There was a man named Marcus. He was not the youngest man in the room. Not the richest. Not even the most physically impressive anymore. Lines had formed around his eyes. Grey had entered his beard slowly over the years. Time had shaped his face with visible honesty. And yet, women noticed him constantly. Not in the loud way younger men seek attention, but in a quieter, more dangerous way. They felt calm around him, curious around him, drawn toward him without immediately understanding why. At first, Marcus misunderstood it himself. He assumed attraction belonged primarily to youth. Until one evening, an older tailor told him something that changed how he viewed aging forever. The tailor adjusted Marcus's jacket calmly before saying, "Young men try to be seen. Older men become unforgettable when they stop needing to be." That sentence stayed with Marcus for years, because he slowly realized something most men never understand. Aging itself is not what weakens attraction. Neglect does. Neglect of discipline. Neglect of self-respect. Neglect of physical and emotional presence. And from that realization emerged the first grooming secret older men rarely understand. A well-groomed older man signals self-respect before he ever speaks. Not vanity. Respect. Marcus noticed how most men his age slowly abandoned themselves without realizing it. Poor posture. Careless clothing. Tired skin. Neglected health. Emotional exhaustion visible in their appearance. And over time, this neglect communicated something deeper psychologically: defeat. The Stoics believed the body reflects the condition of the mind over time, not perfection. Care. Marcus began changing small things quietly. Tailored clothing instead of trendy clothing. Clean shoes. Well-maintained skin. A deliberate haircut. Subtle cologne rather than overpowering fragrance. Nothing excessive, but intentional. And intentionality changes presence completely. One evening, while attending a quiet gathering filled with louder, younger men trying desperately to dominate attention, Marcus noticed a woman named Helena observing him from across the room. She was elegant, composed, emotionally perceptive. Unlike the others, Marcus did not perform for attention. He listened more than he spoke, moved slowly, carried himself without urgency. And strangely enough, that calmness made him stand out more than effort ever could. Later that evening, Helena asked him something directly. "You seem very comfortable with yourself." Marcus smiled faintly. That took longer than growing older. She laughed softly at that. And in that moment, he realized the second grooming secret. Women notice how a man carries himself long before they notice physical details individually. Grooming is not only appearance. It is energy communicated physically. Posture, movement, pace, facial tension, eye contact. Everything reveals internal condition. Most younger men try to manufacture confidence externally. But mature attraction comes from alignment between inner discipline and outer presence. The Stoics called this congruence. A man whose external life reflects internal order. Weeks later, Helena noticed something else about Marcus. He never looked rushed. Not emotionally. Not physically. Not socially. His grooming reflected calmness rather than insecurity. And that revealed the third secret. Older men become more attractive when grooming appears effortless rather than obsessive. There is a difference between caring for yourself and anxiously fighting aging. Women sense that difference immediately. Men desperate to appear young often create tension around themselves. But men who age intentionally create peace. Marcus accepted aging without surrendering to neglect. That balance created dignity. And dignity affects attraction far more deeply than temporary physical perfection. One rainy evening, Helena asked him quietly while they sat beside dim candlelight, "Do you ever wish you were younger again?" Marcus thought for a moment before answering. "No." She looked surprised. "Why?" He smiled faintly. "Younger men usually have energy. Older men can have clarity." That answer stayed with her. Because clarity changes how a man presents himself. Younger men often groom themselves to gain approval. Emotionally grounded older men groom themselves because discipline became identity. And identity always feels stronger than performance. As time passed, Marcus understood another hidden truth most men ignore completely. Scent affects attraction psychologically more than men realize. Not overpowering fragrance. Cleanliness. Subtle signature scent. Fresh skin. Well-maintained hygiene. The fourth grooming secret emerged quietly. Women associate cleanliness with emotional order subconsciously. A neglected man often communicates internal carelessness emotionally as well. The Stoics believed external habits eventually shape internal discipline, and vice versa. Marcus understood now why grooming mattered beyond appearance alone. It communicated self-governance. One evening, Helena leaned closer briefly while speaking to him before smiling softly. "You always smell calm." Marcus laughed quietly. "Calm has a scent now." She nodded. "More than people realize." And strangely enough, she was right. People associate emotional states with physical presence constantly without conscious awareness. Stress has presence. Chaos has presence. Discipline has presence. And grooming amplifies all of it. Weeks later, Helena noticed something most younger men lacked entirely. Marcus looked rested. Not because life was easy. Because he managed stress differently. Which revealed the fifth and perhaps deepest grooming secret. A peaceful face becomes more attractive with age than a perfect face consumed by tension. The lines on Marcus's face did not weaken his presence. They deepened it. Because bitterness had not settled into him. Desperation had not consumed him. Emotional chaos had not hardened him. Instead, there was steadiness. And steadiness ages beautifully. The Stoics believed peace eventually becomes visible in the body itself. Marcus embodied that naturally now. One night, Helena asked him softly, "What makes some older men attractive while others seem to disappear emotionally?" Marcus looked out the window thoughtfully before answering. "Some men age physically. Others age internally first." Silence followed. Because she understood what he meant immediately. Men who stop growing emotionally often begin neglecting themselves physically too. Not suddenly. Gradually. They lose curiosity, discipline, purpose, self-respect, and eventually, their appearance reflects resignation rather than maturity. But men who continue evolving internally often become more attractive with age, not less. Because experience refines them instead of defeating them. Marcus never chased youth. He refined presence. And that changed everything. As months passed, Helena realized what made him irresistible had very little to do with conventional attractiveness alone. It was the way he inhabited himself. Comfortably. Calmly. Without apology. Without desperation. His grooming simply revealed externally what discipline had already created internally. And perhaps that is what women respond to most deeply in older men. Not flawless appearance, but evidence of a man who respected himself enough not to abandon himself as time moved forward. Because in a world obsessed with looking young, there is something profoundly attractive about a man who simply looks at peace with becoming wiser instead. And wisdom, unlike youth, cannot be imitated convincingly. It reveals itself slowly. In restraint. In composure. In the absence of unnecessary urgency. Helena began noticing these details more each time she was around Marcus. The way he adjusted his cuffs calmly before speaking. The way he never checked his reflection obsessively in glass or mirrors. The way his appearance looked intentional without looking rehearsed. Nothing about him seemed desperate for validation. And that alone separated him from most men she encountered. One evening, while they sat together in a quiet lounge filled with dim amber light and low conversation, Helena watched younger men nearby trying endlessly to command attention. Loud voices, forced humor, constant performance. Marcus noticed her observing them and smiled faintly. "You know what happens to many men as they age?" he asked softly. She looked at him curiously. "They either become more grounded or more performative." That sentence lingered in her mind, because she could suddenly see the difference clearly. Some men grow older and become calmer inside themselves. Others grow older but become increasingly desperate to prove they still matter. And desperation always changes presence. The Stoics warned that attachment to external validation eventually weakens inner peace. Marcus had spent years learning to detach from that hunger quietly. And as a result, his grooming no longer came from insecurity. It came from self-respect. That distinction changed everything. One afternoon, Helena accompanied him to a small barber shop tucked away in an older part of the city. The barber greeted Marcus warmly, already understanding exactly how he preferred his haircut. No trends. No exaggerated styling. Just precision. Afterward, while walking back through narrow streets beneath fading sunlight, Helena asked him, "Why do you keep your style so simple?" Marcus adjusted his coat slightly before answering. "Because simplicity ages better than performance." She smiled softly after hearing that. Because deep down, she understood the truth inside it immediately. Men trying too hard to appear youthful often create emotional dissonance. But men who refine simplicity create timelessness. The Stoics admired moderation in all things. Not excess. Not neglect. Balance. Marcus embodied that naturally now. Weeks later, Helena noticed another detail she had never fully appreciated before. Marcus's grooming was consistent. Not impressive occasionally. Consistent daily. His skin looked healthy because he cared for it regularly. His clothes fit well because he maintained discipline consistently. His posture remained strong because he took care of his body continuously. And that revealed another hidden truth. Consistency is more attractive than occasional intensity. Most men pursue transformation emotionally the same way they pursue grooming physically. Brief effort. Short bursts of discipline. Temporary motivation. But women trust consistency far more than temporary performance. The Stoics believed character is formed through repeated habits, not isolated actions. Marcus understood now that grooming was simply another form of self-governance. One evening, Helena touched his hand lightly while speaking before saying quietly, "You make aging seem calm." Marcus looked at her for a moment before responding. "It becomes calmer once you stop treating time like an enemy." That answer affected her more deeply than she expected. Because most people spend years fighting reality emotionally. Fighting age. Fighting change. Fighting imperfection. And the tension from that resistance eventually appears visibly in the face, the body, the eyes. But Marcus carried acceptance without resignation. He did not surrender to neglect. He simply stopped panicking about becoming older. And strangely enough, that calm acceptance made him feel more masculine, not less. One rainy evening, while sitting beside large windows overlooking quiet city streets, Helena asked him something more personal. "Were you always this disciplined?" Marcus laughed softly. "No." She smiled. "So what changed?" He grew quieter for a moment before answering. "I realized neglect spreads." She listened carefully. If a man neglects his body, eventually he neglects his standards. Then his routines. Then his mindset. And slowly he becomes disconnected from himself without noticing. Silence settled softly between them. Because she could feel the truth inside those words immediately. Neglect rarely arrives dramatically. It accumulates quietly. And grooming, at its deepest level, is resistance against unconscious decline. Not vanity. Awareness. The Stoics believed self-respect is expressed through daily conduct, not occasional inspiration. Marcus lived that principle through small rituals consistently. Morning walks, clean appearance, physical discipline, measured speech, rest, stillness. Over time, these habits shaped not only his appearance, but his emotional atmosphere. And emotional atmosphere is what women often respond to most powerfully without consciously realizing it. One afternoon, Helena noticed several women subtly observing Marcus while he sat reading quietly at a cafe. Not because he demanded attention, because he looked deeply at ease within himself. And ease is magnetic, especially in older men. Most men age carrying tension, regret, bitterness, need for approval. But Marcus carried none of it visibly. He carried presence. One evening, Helena finally admitted something she had been thinking for weeks. "You know what makes you attractive?" Marcus smiled faintly. "I'm afraid you're about to tell me." She laughed softly before answering. "You never seem like you're trying to convince anyone of anything." That sentence revealed the deepest grooming secret of all. True masculine presence does not seek validation aggressively. It communicates certainty quietly. And certainty changes how a man moves, dresses, speaks, and ages. The Stoics believed that inner peace eventually becomes visible externally. Marcus was proof of that now. Not perfect, not youthful, not flawless, but composed. And composition ages far better than performance ever will. As the night deepened around them, Helena looked at him differently than before. Not with excitement rooted in fantasy, but with admiration rooted in trust. Because she realized something many women eventually discover with experience. The most attractive older men are not the ones desperately trying to preserve youth, but the ones who learned how to grow older without abandoning themselves in the process. And men who do not abandon themselves age differently. Not just physically, emotionally. Their presence becomes quieter, but stronger. Their words become fewer, but more deliberate. Their appearance stops asking for attention and starts reflecting identity. Helena noticed this every time Marcus entered a room. He never arrived trying to dominate space. Yet space adjusted around him naturally. Not because he demanded respect. Because he carried himself as though he already respected himself enough not to seek constant confirmation from others. And women feel that immediately. One evening, while attending a formal dinner surrounded by wealthy and influential people, Helena watched men half Marcus's age compete endlessly for attention. Expensive watches flashed beneath the lights. Voices grew louder with every story. Confidence became performance instead of presence. Marcus remained unchanged. Simple dark suit, clean shoes, calm posture, measured speech. Nothing excessive. And somehow, that restraint made him more noticeable than anyone else there. Later that evening, Helena asked him quietly, "How do you stay so unaffected by all this?" Marcus glanced around the room briefly before answering. "Because most people are trying to appear valuable instead of becoming valuable." That sentence settled deeply into her mind. Because it explained why so many men looked polished externally but still felt emotionally unstable underneath. The Stoics believed appearance without inner order eventually collapses under pressure. Marcus understood now that true grooming begins internally first. A disciplined man naturally carries himself differently. His skin reflects better habits. His posture reflects confidence without force. His eyes reflect rest rather than exhaustion. Even his clothing begins fitting differently because tension no longer dominates his body constantly. And tension changes everything physically. One afternoon, Helena noticed Marcus adjusting his collar in the reflection of a storefront window briefly before continuing to walk without staring at himself repeatedly. That small detail stayed with her. Because it revealed balance. Awareness without obsession. The problem was never that men cared about appearance. The problem was emotional dependency on appearance. Many men groomed themselves from fear. Fear of aging. Fear of invisibility. Fear of losing relevance. But fear always leaks through behavior eventually. Marcus groomed himself from discipline instead. And discipline feels calm. One rainy evening, Helena sat beside him while soft jazz played quietly in the background of an old restaurant. "You know something strange?" she said softly. Marcus looked at her calmly. "The older I get, the less attractive perfection becomes." He smiled faintly. "Good." She laughed quietly. "No, really," she continued. "Perfect-looking men often feel emotionally exhausting now." Marcus nodded slowly, unsurprised. Because perfection often hides performance. Silence settled gently after that. Because she understood what he meant immediately. People obsessed with appearing flawless often become emotionally fragile underneath. Every flaw threatens identity. Every sign of aging creates panic. Every rejection feels devastating. But grounded men age with less fear because identity no longer depends entirely on appearance. The Stoics believed peace comes from accepting what time changes while disciplining what remains within your control. Marcus embodied that balance naturally now. He exercised not to appear younger, but to remain capable. He dressed well not to impress strangers, but because self-respect became habit. He maintained himself not from insecurity, but from alignment. And alignment is deeply attractive because it feels honest. Weeks later, Helena noticed another subtle difference in Marcus compared to other men. Nothing about him looked accidental. Even simplicity looked deliberate. The fit of his coat, the condition of his hands, the way he sat upright without stiffness, the calm expression resting naturally on his face. All of it communicated one thing quietly. This is a man who has not neglected himself emotionally. And emotional neglect eventually becomes visible physically whether people realize it or not. One evening, while walking slowly beside the river beneath cold city lights, Helena asked him something more vulnerable. "Do you ever worry about becoming invisible as you age?" Marcus was quiet for a moment before answering. "No." She looked curious. "Why not?" He smiled slightly. Because visibility based only on youth was never real power to begin with. That answer stayed with her long after the conversation ended. Because she realized how many men attach their worth to temporary traits. Youth, attention, external validation. But those things fade. And when they do, men without internal substance often collapse emotionally. Marcus had spent years building something deeper instead. Character, peace, discipline, presence. Those qualities age differently. The Stoics believed virtue deepens with time when consciously cultivated. Marcus reflected that now in ways beyond appearance alone. One afternoon, Helena watched him helping an elderly waiter pick up broken glasses after an accident in a crowded cafe. No irritation. No performance. No need to appear important. Just calm action. And strangely enough, that moment affected her more than physical attractiveness ever could. Because true masculine presence reveals itself most clearly in ordinary behavior. Not rehearsed moments. Character always leaks through small actions eventually. Later that evening, Helena spoke softly while looking at him carefully. "You know what makes you different?" Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly. "You don't seem afraid of time." He looked out toward the quiet city lights before replying. "Time only frightens people who built themselves on temporary things." Silence followed again. But it was not empty silence. It was recognition. Because she understood now why Marcus felt so deeply attractive without trying to. His grooming was never about resisting age desperately. It was about honoring himself consistently through every stage of life. And that creates something women feel instinctively. Stability. Dignity. Trust. Because a man who remains disciplined while aging communicates something powerful without words. If he can care for himself this consistently over time, he likely knows how to care for other things that matter too. And women notice that kind of consistency more deeply than most men understand. Not because women are studying grooming consciously like a checklist, but because grooming reflects invisible qualities underneath it. Discipline, awareness, self-respect, emotional condition. Marcus understood this now in a way younger men rarely could. Appearance was never separate from inner life. It was a reflection of it. One morning, Helena arrived early at a quiet cafe where Marcus often spent time reading before work. She noticed him seated near the window with a simple black coat folded neatly beside him, a book resting calmly in his hands. Nothing about him looked forced. No exaggerated style. No attempt to appear important. No restless need for attention. And yet, almost everyone who entered the cafe glanced toward him at some point. Not because he demanded focus. Because grounded people naturally create stillness around themselves. Helena sat across from him quietly before saying, "You know what's rare about you?" Marcus closed the book gently. "What?" "You look comfortable existing without needing to impress anyone." He smiled faintly after hearing that. Because comfort within oneself is something people feel immediately, even if they cannot explain it. The Stoics believed that peace becomes visible in behavior long before it is spoken aloud. Marcus embodied that now through simple things. The absence of rushed movement. The absence of anxious expression. The absence of emotional hunger hidden beneath charm. And over time, Helena realized that these qualities changed how grooming itself appeared on a man. A tailored coat on an insecure man feels performative. The same coat on a grounded man feels natural. Because people react less to objects themselves, and more to the emotional energy surrounding them. One evening, while preparing for a formal event together, Helena watched Marcus adjust his watch quietly before standing still for a moment in front of the mirror. Not admiring himself. Simply making sure he looked aligned. That distinction fascinated her. Most men looked at themselves searching for validation. Marcus looked at himself with awareness. And awareness without insecurity creates elegance naturally. Later that night, as they walked beneath soft city lights, Helena asked him something carefully. "When did you stop trying so hard?" Marcus laughed softly. "I got tired." She smiled. "Tired of what?" "Performing masculinity instead of living it." That sentence settled deeply into the silence around them. Because modern men often confuse appearance with identity. They try to look masculine without building the internal discipline that creates masculine presence naturally. The Stoics warned against becoming consumed by image while neglecting substance. Marcus had spent years reversing that mistake slowly. And over time, substance began shaping image effortlessly. One rainy evening, while sitting quietly beside large windows overlooking the city streets below, Helena noticed the small scar near Marcus's jaw she had never paid attention to before. "You never tried to hide that scar," she said softly. Marcus touched it briefly before smiling faintly. "I earned it." She studied him quietly for a moment. Most men she had known tried desperately to erase every sign of age, pain, or imperfection. But Marcus carried his history openly without shame. And strangely enough, that honesty made him more attractive, not less. Because imperfections accepted calmly often create more presence than perfection pursued anxiously. The Stoics believed scars are not evidence of weakness. They are evidence of endurance. Marcus carried himself like a man who had survived life without allowing bitterness to consume him. And that quality changes the face itself over time. One afternoon, Helena asked him directly, "What do you think happens to men who stop caring for themselves?" Marcus became thoughtful for a moment before answering. "They slowly disconnect from their own standards." She listened carefully as he continued. "And once a man disconnects from his standards, he eventually loses direction too." That answer explained something she had observed quietly for years. Neglect spreads silently. A man stops caring for his appearance. Then his routines weaken. Then discipline fades. Then purpose erodes slowly underneath it all. But self-respect also spreads in the same way. Small disciplines reinforce larger ones. A clean appearance reinforces awareness. Awareness reinforces confidence. Confidence reinforces presence. And presence changes how people experience you long before attraction becomes conscious. One evening, while they walked slowly through an older part of the city, Helena noticed younger women subtly observing Marcus as he passed by. Not with superficial fascination. With curiosity. Because calm masculine presence becomes increasingly rare with age. Most older men carry emotional exhaustion visibly, stress visibly, frustration visibly, but Marcus carried none of it strongly enough to dominate his presence. He looked rested internally, and internal rest changes how a man ages physically more than most people realize. The Stoics taught that chronic emotional turmoil eventually shapes the body itself. Marcus had spent years learning how not to carry unnecessary tension. That discipline became visible now in his eyes, posture, voice, and even the way he walked. One night, Helena finally admitted something she had been slowly realizing over months. I think women become less attracted to appearance alone as they mature. Marcus nodded slightly. Because eventually they start noticing what appearance reflects. She looked at him carefully. And what does your appearance reflect? Marcus was quiet for a moment before answering softly. That I made peace with becoming older without making peace with becoming careless. Silence followed. But this silence felt heavier somehow. Because deep down, Helena knew that sentence contained the entire truth. The most irresistible older men are not the ones trying desperately to hold on to youth, but the ones disciplined enough to carry maturity with dignity instead of surrender. And dignity cannot be purchased. It cannot be faked through expensive clothing or borrowed through status. It is built quietly over years through the way a man treats himself when nobody is watching. Helena began understanding this more deeply every time she observed Marcus in ordinary moments. The way he folded his coat carefully before sitting down. The way he kept his hands well maintained without vanity. The way exhaustion never seemed to fully consume his posture, even after long days. There was order in him. Not rigid order. Intentional order. And intentionality is deeply attractive because it signals awareness. Most people move through life unconsciously. Eating unconsciously. Aging unconsciously. Neglecting themselves unconsciously. Then one day they look in the mirror and wonder where their presence disappeared. Marcus never allowed unconsciousness to shape him for too long. One evening, while sitting together in a quiet restaurant filled with low conversation and soft candlelight, Helena asked him, "Do you think most men realize how much grooming affects attraction?" Marcus smiled faintly. "No. Most men think grooming is about impressing women." She tilted her head slightly. "And it's not. It's about maintaining self-respect," he said calmly. "Women simply respond to the result of that." That distinction changed everything. Because grooming rooted in insecurity feels different from grooming rooted in discipline. Insecure grooming says, "Please validate me." Disciplined grooming says, "I haven't abandoned myself." And women feel that difference instinctively. The Stoics believed external order often reflects internal order. Not perfectly, but consistently enough to matter. Marcus understood this deeply now. A man who cannot maintain basic care for himself over time often struggles maintaining emotional discipline too. Neglect rarely stays isolated. One afternoon, Helena watched Marcus polishing his shoes slowly before an event. Not hurriedly. Not obsessively. Calmly. She smiled softly. "You treat simple things seriously." Marcus glanced up briefly. Simple things become character when repeated long enough. That sentence stayed with her, because it explained why Marcus felt so composed compared to other men his age. His confidence was not built through dramatic moments. It was built through repeated standards. Daily habits. Small disciplines. Quiet consistency. The Stoics taught that excellence is formed through repeated actions until discipline becomes identity. Marcus no longer forced these behaviors. He had become them. Weeks later, Helena noticed another hidden difference in him. Marcus never used appearance to compete with younger men. That freedom changed his entire energy. He was not trying to prove he still mattered. Not trying to outdress youth. Not trying to imitate younger trends desperately. And because of that, he looked timeless instead of aging anxiously. One evening, while walking beneath cold evening air through crowded streets, Helena observed men desperately attempting to appear younger than they were. Forced fashion. Forced slang. Forced energy. Marcus noticed her expression and smiled slightly. Trying too hard always reveals fear, he said quietly. She looked at him. Fear of what? Being forgotten. Silence settled between them, because she realized how many men age with panic hidden beneath performance. But Marcus had accepted something many men never do. Aging is not the loss of attractiveness. It is the exposure of character. Time eventually removes distractions, removes superficial advantages, removes temporary beauty. And what remains is the emotional atmosphere a person built within themselves over decades. Marcus had built calmness, discipline, presence, clarity. So age refined him instead of exposing emptiness. The Stoics believed difficult seasons reveal what already existed beneath the surface. Time does the same thing. One rainy evening, Helena touched the silver strands beginning to spread through Marcus's hair before smiling softly. You know, I think grey hair looks attractive on certain men. Marcus laughed quietly. Certain men? She nodded. Yes. The ones who wear age naturally instead of fighting it emotionally. That answer carried truth. Because resistance creates tension.